Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to our Hood episode 34, where we are going to discuss optional sidecar, a tool of Cilium Service Mesh. Cilium 1.12 reached GA, so congratulations to the entire Cilium team. One of the interesting features introduced in this release is Cilium Service Mesh with optional sidecars. So in this live stream, I am so happy to have Denis join me. He is the creator of the Envoy UI tool. So if you recall, I think Denis, you were back at 24, I think, of Hood, where you and Greg, right, were giving us a presentation and demo about your Envoy UI tool and Greg's Ingress tool. So you've been debugging Envoy and Istio across many releases. So he's going to show us a live demo and share his experience of exploring Cilium Service Mesh. So Denis, do you want to quickly introduce yourself for the audience who
Yeah.
don't remember you?
So hi everyone. So I am Denis Janot. I am based in Paris, and I am the director of field engineering team in EMEA at solo.io.
Awesome. I am so excited to have you. And Paris, that's like a dream city for many of us to go to vacation or even live there. So that's totally cool. So before we get to the episode, I just want to briefly share two of the news I heard recently. So the first one is the team that started cloud.com, Cloud Stack, and Rancher, they are back with a new company that produce Kubernetes tools. So this company called Arconaps. So check them out. It's pretty interesting. The next news I want to share is about my blog. So for some of you know, I had a blog to compare layer 7 policy between Cilium and Istio. So that blog unfortunately was taken down from CNCF. So we did publish that blog on solo.io for folks who are looking for that blog. And I also published a follow-on blog just trying to explain with Yuval how network cache-based identity could potentially be mistaken. So there are steps in the blog if you're interested to try them. If you prefer to watch me to do it in my environment, check out the recording I have. So that's the two news I would like to share with the team. With that, I would like to go through a discussion with Denis on service mesh of Cilium. So the first thing I want to ask you, Denis, is, I think you and I both have a very strong service mesh background, right? So to me, service mesh provide three key functionalities: connect, secure, and observe, right? So what are the functions have you tried with Cilium Service Mesh?
So what I did is I agree with you. It's composed of many components, right? If you look at Cilium, for example, Hubble provides observability, and you could put that in that bucket, right? What I did is really focus on what the Cilium documentation is putting in the service mesh category, right? And what's new, right? Basically, that's also what's interesting here, right? So if you look at the Cilium documentation, and I will show you that in a minute, basically the service mesh is composed of two main features, like the ingress and the traffic management, like L7 traffic management, right? So these are the two topics I focused on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually at the docs looking at now. So if you want to share, feel free to share your screen.
You can show my screen.
Audience, easy for our audience to follow.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you
we
see
can.
here, basically, if you go into getting started, things are in different, and you have an observability, chapter, right? That could be potentially part of the mesh, right? But what is called service mesh here in Cilium is really these two components, right? The ingress support and the L7 traffic management. So that's where I focused my experimentation.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess so. That may be one way to interpret this is maybe the initial thing that's introduced as part of their service mesh function. They focus on the connect piece of connect, secure, and observe.
Yeah, because the observe and secure are already there, right? I would say the observe with Hubble and the secure with the network policies, not with probably the granularity you would need in a mesh, right? But there are some some components there as well, right?
Yeah, they have part-to-part encryption if you enable WildGuard or IPsec. Certainly, it's network cache-based identity, right? So it's not mature TLS like what Istio has.
Yeah, and you have some network policies as well where you can define some security rules about which pod can talk to which pod. So you can do basically that with layer 4 based on eBPF, or you can do that with layer 7. In that case, it's leveraging Envoy behind the scene.
Yeah.
But there are some limitation in the L7 in the rules you can create, let's say.
Yep. Okay, so let's focus on Cilium Service Mesh and particularly on the connect feature, since that's the documentation particularly about. So I guess I haven't personally played with it myself, so I want to ask you, how's your experience? Can you share with us your learning journey if you're open to share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I will go, step by step so that I think everyone
Mm-hmm.
kind of get the same experience I got, but without the pain of, setting up everything. So that's should be a way for people to very quickly, understand what you can do with it. So I already created my GKE cluster, and you have to use these node tains here when you want to install Cilium later. And then you have the Cilium CLI that is quite nice because it detects basically the environment and will automatically, deploy Cilium based on this environment. So here it will detect that this is GKE and it needs to do things in a particular way. And you can see here what I did is that I set this value, the Helm value, like Ingress controller enabled, right? So that means that now, when I use this command, I should be able to use this new Ingress functionality that is described here, basically. And feel free to interrupt me if you have question, Lynn. But the first thing I did when uh, I deployed it, right, I was like, okay, let me check what's happening there, right? What's going on, and especially on the Cilium components, right? So I can see here, I have my Cilium, daemon set that's create like a Cilium pod on each node, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have three nodes, and I have the operator component, which is having multiple roles in the life cycle of Cilium itself. Watching some object in Kubernetes and doing some maintenance behind the scene and so on, right? And when I did that, I was when I ran this command, I was kind of expecting like a new pod, like an Ingress controller pod here, right? And fact's not really what's going on here, right? So what I can do is that I can just let me just move this
So
thing.
can I ask a quick question? So I know, so I've installed Cilium myself. Played with layer 7 policy. So one thing I noticed new is the Cilium node init. Is that related to the ingress you are enabled?
No. I think it's just related to GKE. You have some specific.
Oh, okay. So yeah, okay, that's why. Thank you.
Noise. And so if now I go to kube system and I go to this one of the Cilium pod, right? the thing that you can notice here is that there is this Cilium Envoy that is started
Yeah.
because I enabled the Ingress controller option. I don't know if some people have already joined the Cilium workshop that we are delivering regularly, but in this workshop we explain that when you create like a Cilium network policy at the L7, it
Yep.
automatically start this Cilium Envoy to enforce it, right? Because everything L7 in Cilium is enforced on Envoy. So here, what you see is that as soon as I enable the Ingress controller option, it starts Envoy in all these daemon set pods, right? So all the Cilium pods have the Envoy running from the beginning. It doesn't do
Okay.
anything yet, but it's there, right?
Okay, so I could have two ways to kind of activate this component inside of the Cilium pod. One way is through a layer 7 policy of Cilium, like the lab you were mentioning. The other way is through that Helm parameter you just show to enable the ingress. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you don't really want to enable this stuff manually, right?
Yeah,
You want to apply networks policies like at L7, or you want to use Ingress, or and
yeah, I
automatically what
agree.
it does is that it will kind of deploy this component because it needs it, right? But I highlight that because I know that for a lot of people it's a little bit confusing because Envoy is there, but you don't really see it here. You don't really see it in a
Mm-hmm.
container, right? It's really just like a process that is started inside the container, right? Which is kind of an anti-pattern to what you find in Kubernetes in general, where you try not to have multiple, processes in the same container, right? So that's why I highlight that because it's not natural for a user to find where Envoy is running, right? People are looking for, perhaps there is a pod or like an Envoy pod or at least a container in the Cilium pod, but that's not the case, right? It's really like a process here. Make sense?
Yeah, definitely. If harder for people with me from an Istio background, because in Istio or what Istio Ingress Gateway has its own pod, right? So yeah, it's just you can find it basically on the name of the pod without peeking into the processes.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that I was expecting a little bit as well was to find like a Kubernetes service that represent my ingress, right? So let's say you deploy like, even if it's not Envoy, right? Let's say you deploy
Mm.
like the Nginx controller, for example, right?
Yeah,
Then what will happen is that you will have an Nginx instance that will run, right? And you will have a service that will be created. And this service will be by default like a service type load balancer with an external IP to access it, right?
yep,
And even before you start to generate an ingress rule, you already have this service created and you can already know how you will be able to access your object later, right? But here, there is no such service. It's not the only case, right? I think GKE default controller is also kind of, using the same behavior. You can see here I have no service for the GKE default ingress, right? And if I would create an ingress, it would create a service, right? But
hmm,
you will see later that then there are some issues with this approach. But in any case, what I'm going to do right now is just like create an application, deploy an application, and after I deploy this application, we can create an ingress and we can see what's going on, right? But I just share,
okay,
the in the same order while I discover on what was my, you know, um,
yeah.
out
So you
there,
deploy the famous booking for application now.
which is, this application for people who don't know, right? Which is basically composed of like the product page uh, front end that calls the reviews backend and the details backend, and the reviews backend, some of the versions call the ratings backends. So you'll see it will be good because I will be able to use it to expose different services and play between the versions, like you will see a little bit later.
Yeah.
So
So I
I have
guess
my
one thing here was highlighting is you are deployed without sidecar, right? So it's
yeah,
just the
exactly.
application. Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you can see it here, right? You have like just 1/1 means like one container.
Yep.
So then that's an ingress, right? So an ingress is like a standard Kubernetes object. You can see here it's part of the Kubernetes API. A lot of people have heard about this initiative to have like the new gateway API that is already there but still evolving.
Yep.
And basically the idea of this ingress object is it's very limited about what you can do with it, and the gateway API is supposed to, or is adding some more functionalities that you generally find in a API gateway. But still you see most of the API gateway vendors like us, for example, right, have their own API because it's very difficult to find an agreement between all the vendors about how this API should look like, and there are so many different features that you can get in an API gateway that it's difficult to standardize that, right? But at least I would say the Ingress allows you to expose easily your services to outside, and if you want to do things a little bit more complicated, then you have the gateway API, and I know that the Cilium community wants to support that gateway API as well in the future.
Yep.
And then when you want to do even more, generally you come with your own API so that you can cover like more complex use cases.
Yeah, I think you summarized well. So the Ingress API is very good for simple scenario, but users that do find out there's a need for the a more advanced API that covers different edge cases, which is the Kubernetes Gateway API,
Yeah,
which is derived from the Istio networking API.
yeah, exactly. So here you see I do something very simple. I want to expose my detail service when a request comes from start by /details, right?
Yep.
And now if I look at my service again, you see that I have like this new service that is created for this detail ingress, right? And it was the name of my ingress, right? Detail ingress. So it's just like a suffix to this, right? Cilium ingress dash detail ingress. And you can see, right, it's by default like a load balancer. Um,
Mm.
I don't think you can change that in any case, but so you need like as a prerequisite to use it, you need to have like a load balancer integration. Like if you are on premise, you could use something like Metal LB. If you are in the cloud, you don't need to really care about it because it will just like deploy a cloud load balancer for you. But it's quite important to understand what's going on, right? So basically here, I get now an external IP to access this ingress, but this
Mm-hmm.
external IP is not just like an IP that is allocated and send the request to your cluster. It's a really cloud load balancer that you have to pay for, right? So every time you create a service type load balancer in Kubernetes, you end up with a new load balancer. I mean, like a Google Cloud load balancer in Google Cloud, or you would have like a um, like a ELB, in AWS and so on, right? So that means that here I get this load balancer created, and now I can access my ingress through this IP. So if I set this environment variable, which basically you will see it's just like this IP here, right?
Yep.
Now I can send a curl and get my details, right? So that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So you can now through the external IP, you can access to your detail service in the cluster from your laptop, which is outside of the cluster. So I have a question. So when the traffic arrives on this IP, external IP, so how does the route happens? So somehow does it go from this .100 to the Envoy on that particular node or running in the Cilium pod? And then that Envoy knows to route the traffic because it goes to /details, and then it knows to route the traffic to the detail service.
So yeah, exactly. Basically, the way like the cloud load balancer works is that the service type load balancer is is also a service type node port, right? So that means that there is a port you can see here, like this port here, like 3258, that is open on each Kubernetes node. And the load balancer that is provisioned in the cloud is going to spread the request across the 3 nodes in my Kubernetes cluster on this port. So it will come in any of these nodes, and then when it arrives there, then there is like Cilium is like using eBPF to direct the traffic to the Envoy proxy that is running in the Cilium pod, and then this Envoy proxy is sending the request to the pod at the end, right? So
Okay.
the role of eBPF here is only to direct traffic from that comes in this port to the Envoy that is running in the Cilium pod. Everything else is Envoy.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so
And
essentially this particular service doesn't really have in like a deployment serving, like
no,
in the traditional Kubernetes sense, right? When you have a service, you have a deployment corresponding to it. This service doesn't have any concrete deployment, but somehow through eBPF, the traffic is redirected to the Envoy running in the Cilium pod.
exactly. And you can see it here, right? So there is nothing targeted by this service directly, right? This kind of
Yeah,
service.
okay.
Then what you can do is that you can also see that there is like a Envoy configuration that is, generated. It's what we call a Cilium Envoy config. It's a new CRD, and this basically is created automatically from your Ingress. So basically, the what Cilium does, it takes your Ingress YAML and it generates this Envoy configuration from it, right? So if I look at it, and if you are a little bit familiar with Envoy, then you'll see that basically here, right, I have this Cilium Envoy config, and you define what are the backend services. So you can see here, right, the details and default and whatever, right? And then you can basically, you have some default values there. And the most important is here, right? You have this route that says like for any domain, if it starts by /details, then I want to send it to this cluster here. And this cluster is defined just there, right? You see, this is a cluster definition in Envoy, right? And this is the name of it. And you see there is no information about the IP right now, right?
Mhm.
So to do that, what happened is that there are a few things that are going on there, right? So the first thing that you can take a look at is all this configuration is basically then passed to the Envoy configuration. So if I look at normally, if you are familiar with Envoy, you have this way to get a config dump by doing a port forward on the port where the admin interface of Envoy is running.
Yeah.
But when I started to look at it, right, and I did that for the workshop, that we have. So I just used the same way. But when I did the workshop, I struggled a little bit to find a way to get these config dump. And basically, I found out that it was not listening to any port, but is just like a Unix socket. So basically, I get this config dump from the Unix socket here, and that gives me the full config dump of Envoy right now, and I can see the same things that's coming from this Cilium CRD, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I can do is, as I said, there is no. So where did I put that? I think I put that in. Node. There is no IP right there. So what happened is that in Envoy you have this. You can get some data from the control plane using XDS, and one of the data you can get is the endpoint information coming from EDS, right, which is one of the
Mhm.
XDS component. And I found a way with a a little bit of weird snippet to get this data sent by the Cilium EDS to Envoy, using grpicker. And what I can see here is that because I created this Ingress, it created this Envoy config, and what it did as well is that it basically provides through this EDS, it provides the information about, okay, this is the cluster I want to use, and these are like the endpoints, right? So for example, here, this is the IP of the pod, right? So I have only one pod for the details component, so this is the IP of the pod. So all these things together are making this Ingress functionality working.
Did you write that tool, that EDS tool, to pull out the EDS config?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a little bit of weird snippet.
Okay, gotcha.
I need to, I kind of, found, what was this gRPC endpoint, and then, because I know how that works, right? This endpoint, I was able to, get the node information of my Envoy through the config dump and then injecting that here. So it's a little bit weird. I don't want to go too much into details there because
Yeah.
it's not easy to understand if people are not like expert on Envoy.
Yeah, makes sense.
But let me do another thing. Right now, let's say I want to expose a second service, right? Like the reviews service. Then I create another Ingress object. And I think it's quite important because that's highlight what I was explaining before, which is that here, every time someone would create an Ingress object, that would basically generate the creation of another load balancer in the cloud, right? So if you have like, I don't know, 10 different Ingress objects, then you will have 10 load balancer, which will be obviously at the end will start to be expensive because you pay for each these load balancers. But also it can become a little bit tricky about how to share domain names, right? Because if you don't want to use IPs, right? You want to use like a domain name, so you will have to configure your DNS in one way or another to send the traffic to one of these load balancer and not all of them, right? So
Right.
you will have to find a way to split it, right? And yeah, that can be tricky. That's what I say. Like normally, what the Ingress controller do is that they create a default service when you deploy them, and you have a unique load balancer, unique IP. Then you can automate the configuration of your DNS, or you just do it yourself. But then all the requests for your domain names, they go through this IP and is shared by everyone, right?
Yeah, that's what a glue edge or Istio Ingress gateway does, right? So there is one mapping between that particular IP to a particular host name, and then the traffic can just go through that particular host name on maybe different paths. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I find that it's interesting. It seems like each service has its own dedicated IP, but it doesn't have the dedicated envoy. So, because in Istio, we recommend user to have dedicated Ingress gateway if you really needs to be like your application is very critical. You don't want to share your Ingress gateway with any other application. But in here, even though you have your dedicated IP, you still share the envoy with other people.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting thing, right? We can talk about that later, but it's basically means that you can generate conflicts. The chances to generate conflict by creating ingress object is probably lower than the chances to do that in writing the Cilium envoy config directly, like we will do a little bit later. But still, it can be a little bit complicated, right? And the only way you can share a service here would be that you create only one large, ingress object with everything in it, basically. The granularity is really the object itself.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's the ingress. But let's jump into the traffic management because it's just an Ingress controller, right? As we discussed before, right? There are a lot of things that in the documentation you could put in the service mesh that are in other places. You could also argue that these Ingress things could be outside of the service mesh because it's an Ingress controller, right? It's not like, purely service mesh, right? So it's just a question of the way you interpret things. So the second thing we want to do is, and let me just like close my WhatsApp. So the other thing we want to do is like, and this for me is really more like what I call service mesh, right? Which is having this layer 7 traffic management, right? And here, what I want to do is like when a service send a request to the reviews service, right? You remember here we said that there are V1, V2, and V3. Then I want to define to send 90% to V1 and 10% to V2, right? It's kind of a typical use case you have in service mesh. You want to go from, you have a current V1 in production, you want to have some requests now going to V2, but only like a small percentage of it, just checking if
Mhm.
everything is going well, and then you can start to send more traffic, right? You could even have like use some nice project like Flagger to even automate, and if the latency is good and the error rate is low, then I want to automatically increase the number of requests going to V2 and so on, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a typical thing. One thing perhaps some people could say, hey, why you put details here and not product page, right? Because it's normally the product page. The only reason why I did that way is because details is the container, the image that has the curl installed, which is not the case of the product page. And these services, you cannot add new packages on it. And I didn't want to rebuild the images just to have curl. So I said, okay, let's do it in a simpler way. So it's just details I use, but it could be whatever, right? I
Yeah.
don't
So it's just a client.
exactly a client trying to send a request to reviews, right?
Yeah.
So I looked at the example that is in the documentation, which basically deploys two service, Eco Service 1 and Eco Service 2, and does a 50-50 on these two ones, right? So in my case, I just want like reviews here, right? And reviews V1 and reviews V2, right? So what I did at the first attempt, right? Because you'll see I will do different attempts so that you can see, how I got it working at the end, is that I, created this Cilium Envoy config here, where I just say I want to, when a request goes to reviews, right? Then I want to send to default reviews V1 90% and default reviews V2 10%, and I define these services there, right?
Wow. So this is, I mean, this is, I guess, people coming from Istio background. This is the equivalent of writing Istio Envoy filters, right?
Uh,
You have to know exactly what you're doing.
yeah, in Istio you have this abstraction that is a virtual service, right? And then it's
Yeah.
translated into Envoy configuration. Here it's really raw Envoy configuration. So obviously Envoy is not for human, right? Is for like being programmed by a machine, right? And basically that means that yeah, definitely it's you will create conflicts very quickly, right? Like for example, even this root name here, you see the LB root has to be unique, this listener as well, right? This root name, all those things, like if people use the same things, then everything will be broken because someone will configure, let's say I have like my root, right? And the other guy calls
Mm-hmm.
my root, right? Then there will be a conflict because there will be my root created twice, right? And then you will start to inject the traffic in the wrong place, right? And even like when you have an abstraction layer on top of it, like Istio is having the virtual service and then is translated by Istio control plane into Envoy configuration. The most difficult part is not to translate. The most difficult part is to handle all these namespacing and all these conflict resolution, right? And it took like years for Istio to handle all of the possible cases that you can get to break it, right?
Yeah.
So definitely, even with a control plane is difficult. So writing the raw configuration could be very
Yeah.
tricky.
Yeah, basically user is trying to do what is your control plane does for them, right? Because they need to come up with the raw configuration and then deploy it to their Kubernetes cluster that runs Cilium Service Mesh.
Exactly. So if I try to curl now from ratings uh, to reviews, and in fact, I think I put details here. Yeah, I need to update it. I don't know why I said details. It's rating that has the curl command. And if I do that, I get this no LC upstring, right? So I could obviously, before I've shown you like the config dump, right? So I could write this config dump in a file, and you mentioned the Envoy UI that you can use
Yeah.
with the config dump. It doesn't work with this config dump because it's not in the format I exactly expect. So I have
I
like a
see.
patch version on my laptop, and in this patch version you can see here, right, a little bit what's going on now in my Envoy configuration, where I have these details for the Ingress details, right? I have the reviews for the Ingress reviews, and I have this LB route. And as I say, it has to be unique, right? And for any request here, then I will send the request, 90% to V1 and 10% to V2. But then what we don't show here is the endpoint information, right? So if I look at the EDS, right, like I did before,
Mhm.
then what we can see, we can have a look at what information is provided by Cilium to Envoy through EDS, because it tells us that we have no healthy upstream, right? So here I can see that I have the details from my Ingress. I have the reviews, cluster name, review star, right? But I have nothing for reviews v1, right? And that's the problem I have right now. And you can see that as well if I would just go to, uh, instead of like looking at the config dump, you have something called clusters in Envoy. And if I would do a grep reviews, I can see that the default reviews here has like endpoints, because you see I have like one IP of the V1 or V2 or V3, I don't know, right? One here and one here, right?
Mhm.
But the reviews V1, I don't have any endpoints, and the reviews V2, I don't have any endpoint either, right?
Okay.
And
When you run the curl command, were you calling reviews or review version 1 or version 2?
I was just calling reviews because my service in Kubernetes, I need to use a service name, right? So I
Okay.
use reviews because that's my review service name. But normally the way it works, like if you look in Istio, for example, right, when you say, I want to use V1 or V2 or V3, I want to do like, I want to do the same thing basically, right, with Istio.
Yeah.
And I will create what we call a destination rule to define what is V1, what is V2, what is V3. And it will create a subset which is normally coming in between these two columns here. So you
Mhm.
would have default slash reviews, column 9080, column the subset name, let's call it V1, right? And so on, right? But here there is no way I can configure the subset here. So what I found out, in fact, is that there is like in the documentation, it says somewhere, when I was looking in, no, it was in the troubleshooting guides. So where do I have it here? I have it somewhere, I think. Uh, where was this troubleshooting guide? I think I put a link here, in fact. So if I go down, yeah, it's here. So if you go to the troubleshooting guide, then you find somewhere that there is here, you see, the Envoy Discovery Service, so EDS, use this convention, right, which is name, service name, and port, right? So that
Mhm.
means that to be able to make my scenario working, I need to create some extra Kubernetes services, right? So what I'm going to do now is just like creating this reviews v1 service and reviews v2 service, right? And now if I do this that way, I won't be able to see more here, right? I still have no endpoint configured. But what I found out is that you need to basically add these services there before they can, be reached with this endpoint discovery service, right? So before the endpoint discovery service can configure them, right? But while we were discussing about the Ingress before, I think I perhaps have an idea about another way to do it. So let's try it live, right? I'm curious about it, so I want to check with you guys right now, right? So you remember here, this is the Cilium Envoy config that has been created by the Ingress, right? And there is this backend services here, right?
Yep.
So that's interesting because I just realized when I was doing it before that this is different from the services here, right? So let's try something. So let's try to take this Envoy configuration here because that could be another interesting option. And instead of setting the services, v1, v2 that I created, right? I want to try with these backend services. Okay.
Okay. Is this new you're trying?
Yeah, I like to try stuff live just to see.
So hoping that would save you from listing version 1 and version 2.
Yeah, let's see. Perhaps it will fix one of the problem I was still having. So it's like namespace and then there is this number. So let's
port number.
Let's put this port number as well. Just okay. Okay, so now I can go here and see.
So you're hoping the EDS information would show up for version 1 and version 2?
That, yeah. And basically you can also, so the problem is that because I put this Envoy configuration, you can have some wrong syntax or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So the only way you would be able to see it, let me check again here. It looks really bad. But the only way you can see it is that you have to basically go into the logs of the Cilium operator, basically. And when something it doesn't like, it will tell you here, right? It will tell you like, rejected by Envoy or whatever. Like you have like a little bit of details there, right? But in any case, unfortunately, I think it didn't fix my problem, right? No. If I do a curl again,
no, it does. Do you want to go back, check the endpoint? Maybe it's...
Yeah, I will check again.
That's pretty nice. Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't, because you see it still send me to red. So it didn't...
Oh, it didn't do the traffic shifting.
Yeah, it does another side effect that I was not expecting. So that's not what I want. So basically, yeah, so that's why when I do here, I don't see the IP, because what it's configured now is just like going through that, right? We could probably even find it in the config dump. Try to open this one. Perhaps we will have a better idea about how it has configured this thing. So here it's just, yeah, it's still sent to this default reviews v1 and v2, but these clusters have no endpoint. So basically, I think it just bypasses. It's probably just like Envoy that refuses it, but it doesn't tell me anything about it. So basically, it just doesn't go through Envoy, right? It's just bypassing.
Yeah, round robin. So basically, the fact that it went to the red review, which is version 3, that means our traffic rules are not in effect, right?
Exactly. So the way I was work around it last time, so now let's go back to my initial way was like to list the 3 services directly there, right?
Yeah.
And when I was doing that, then I was able to get the endpoint correctly set for V1 and V2. But and then I'm able to make it work correctly here, right? So if I go there, now I have the either okay, no.
You still have red.
Yeah, I think it broke it basically. It probably broke the Envoy configuration because last time I tried this one was okay, right? So it was basically able to so probably yeah, let me try to I think we broke it. This is not going to Cilium at all or to Envoy. Now let's try to apply this thing. And this is this one, right? Just check again. Now if I try, oh, but no, I was not on the, okay. I know why it was working with black because I was not calling the right thing. I was calling the external one, not the other one.
Oh yeah, you're going through the Ingress. That's why.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have catch that.
That's why I was
Okay.
surprised that I was getting black and red before, right? But
Oh yeah.
now let me try the right one, which is okay. So now we can see that most of the time we'll get to V1, so there is no stars at all.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of the time we go to it, and 10% of the time we go through the black one, right? So we should get the black soon. At very low number, it's not like exactly mathematical things, right? Yeah, you see, I get the black, right? So that sounds good, but there is a side effect of this, which is that if now I want to call explicitly the version V2, right? I want to, let's say, I have this reviews that is for production and I want to shift my traffic, right? But before I do that, probably I want to send a request to V2 directly, or perhaps I want to do some other test.
Testing. Yeah, test exclusively on my version 2, I assume.
Exactly.
Is that?
But then you cannot anymore, right? Because
Oh, it goes to version 1 now.
because it's part of these services. So that means that it will be, you know, also redirecting the traffic the same way for all these services, right?
Oh, okay. That's why you
Another
were trying backend services, hoping it would not change the
exactly
review version 1
perhaps there is
behavior.
another way with the backend services, right?
Yeah.
And perhaps there is a way, right? But it's just like even me who knows really well the Envoy stuff, right? I didn't find, right? And the last one I want to try is just like, okay, I can keep the same 3 services here. I can keep that, but here I just put the domain, here reviews 98 here, right? And if I do that, then you see I would basically get like a 404 when I go to review it. I was hoping that if I do that, then it will not impact the other ones. But the thing is that it still attach my route to it still redirect traffic for these guys as well, and then there is no listener or there is no matcher, right, for this domain, and then it just reject it basically. So it's not as well the right way. And I also wanted to point out that if you want to do it properly, you would also do like reviews, then reviews.default, then reviews.default.svc.cluster.local, all the possible options. Like again, like Istio is doing that on the control plane and generate automatically all the possible names and so on, right?
Oh, so you need to add these to all the cluster configuration?
No, I mean like it's on the matcher right here, like if
On the
I
matcher, okay, on the domain.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay, makes sense.
not the matcher, the domain. Yeah. So yeah, I mean like that's pretty it, right? I mean, obviously you can make it work for some cases. but even if it works, right, we discussed about the main issue, right, which is like users cannot really write this code, right? And I think, I watched like a webinar from Isovalent recently, and they were saying the same, that basically this is not like meant for users, right? It's more meant from being the foundation to be used by an higher abstraction layer, like it's the case for the Ingress right now.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think the idea is to have in the future, like either using the gateway API or whatever, using, having like a layer that allow the user to express what they want, and having that, you know, higher level abstraction translated into the Cilium Envoy config, right? The challenge is that on the Ingress side, right, on the north south, it it took years for API gateway communities or vendors, to expose all these features and being able to generate the right configuration and to manage, the all the potential issues and conflicts, and all this stuff, right? So that's a lot of work, right, to just even
Yeah.
north south. And then on the east west, it's another set of challenges, right? It took again years for Istio or other communities to build this abstraction right in a scalable way, being able to manage all the multi-tenancy and conflicts, and manage telling you which envoy is in sync and not. And plus the fact that there is only one envoy, right? That means that the consequence of a bad configuration will impact everyone, basically, right?
Yeah.
So
So that's a recap what
yeah.
we just learned. So essentially, you did a demo of using Kubernetes Ingress resource to expose two of your services out to outside of the cluster, and you were able to get it work, but each were assigned their own load balancer IP, challenging with host name resolution to these IPs, and they both were sharing the same envoy from the Cilium pods. You also showed a demo of trying to get a real basic scenario, I guess that I would say, in the Istio world, right? To do 90% on version 1 and 10% on version 2. That's a very common scenario. And to the end, I think you try different things and you get it partially working, but it's not fully working because you can't fully testing review version 2 now. When you go there 100%, it gets to 10%. So it's in a, I guess, and you with a lot of your expertise with Envoy, you know, you still haven't been able to get it fully working, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say it's not even the main point, because I've just found this backend service perhaps could help, and I'm pretty sure that there is a way to find a way to make it work, right? If I would look at the code of the way EDS works in Cilium, probably I will find a way, a workaround that would make it work, right? But even if I could, right, it would be really challenging anyway, right? So
Yeah, the complexity of the configuration for something, I guess in Istio, it would be like 5 out 10 lines. Yeah, this is very, very hard to digest and create these configuration unless you really know Envoy and been working with Envoy probably for over a year or so.
yeah, no, definitely. And I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen also people who started with building their own mesh before Istio was really mature, right? And invested a lot of time and energy to learn Envoy and to build their own control plane on top of Envoy, and investing a lot of money in that, right? And at the end, these guys, most of them decided to go to Istio, right? Even if
Go
they
back
already
to
had everything,
Istio. Yeah.
because of the complexity of maintaining all these different configuration, for because we speak about like just basic routing, but then you have like to implement all the retries and timeout and circuit breaking, and like a lot of other features. And the problem is always the same. Is like if you would have only one team doing everything, you could still make it work, right? But the problem is that you want to have different users um, having their configuration, that provide their configuration, and then managing conflicts is very complicated. You really need a lot of experience to make it properly, having a right convention for all the routes and all the listener and all the things, and you know keeping the previous configuration that worked in case a new configuration comes and is not good, so that at least the old configuration is still enforced and not broke by the new configuration. Then you need to report why the new configuration is not working, and then the user needs to figure out. So it's like it's a full project on its own, right? And
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like I started, I was playing with the Cilium Service Mesh beta in December, so I was really curious about it when I heard about this project. And the reason why I was really interested by it, because I thought, okay, let's see how is it different, right? Like, can it be like eBPF doing all these things, right? But then, as soon as I discovered that 99% of it is like Envoy, right? And eBPF is just used to redirect the traffic to Envoy. Then I felt like that the value is like a lot lower, because there are already a lot of Ingress controllers that are really good. There are already a lot of service mesh options based on Envoy that are mature, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it would be a very, very long journey if you want to reinvent or recreate all these things in Cilium itself.
Yeah. Let's wrap up. We are almost out of the time. So I want to take a minute to thank you, Denis, for sharing your journey and put out an interesting demo and show your struggle to get things working. So I'm sure our audience would really appreciate your experience with that. So thank you so much. And folks, if you guys find this episode interesting, please give us a thumbs up. And also subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our future educations on Cilium, on eBPF, on Istio, Envoy, and all the other cloud native technologies, so you can be educated at your job. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Happy learning, and see you at our next episode. Thank you so much, Denis. Bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye bye.